This I've already explained in the membrane class. Lipid bilayers are selectively permeable. This is what happening. Small non-polar groups are easily diffusible, whereas small uncharged polar groups are undergoes diffusion but at a slower rate. With the help of channel, it can pass in a very fast manner. Whereas large uncharged polar groups like amino acid, glucose, nucleotides will not pass through the membrane, and also the ions. They are impermeable to membrane. But how we can pass these impermeable solutes to the interior of the membrane? With the help of carriers. With the help of carriers. Carriers or protons. Next, coming to the classification of the membrane transport. So, the transport mechanism carries either small molecules or large molecules. If it carries the large molecules, this is done by two mechanisms. One is by exocytosis and another one is by endocytosis. Exocytosis means it is going to expel the materials outside. Endocytosis means it is going to get in the substances inside. Next, how the small molecules are transported, either by passive diffusion or active transport. Passive transport or active transport. Passive by two mechanisms, simple and facilitated diffusion, and active by primary and secondary active transport. So, this is the classification of the membrane transport. Next, we'll see the transport mechanism one by one, and this is the lipid bilayer. The transport occurs based on the direction and magnitude of the gradients. Okay, so the magnitude of the gradients means it may be a concentration gradient or it is a electrical gradient. That means it may be the quantity of the substances in the exterior and interior of the cell, otherwise based on the electrical signal. So, they are collectively called as electrochemical gradient. So, here I have shown a concentration gradient. When you see the concentration gradient, the substances where it is higher in the exterior. Here the concentration is higher compared to the interior of the cell. So, the movement ultimately pass from the exterior to interior. When the substance move along the gradient, it is called as downhill. When it is against the gradient, the molecule is moving against the gradient, it is called as uphill. So, first we'll see the passive diffusion. The passive diffusion, it goes along the gradient, that is downhill from exterior to interior. This we call as simple diffusions because it does not require any carrier. It just moves from exterior of the cell to the interior of the cell along the gradient. If it requires a channel to pass the molecules from outside to inside, we call it as a facilitated diffusion. So, if the molecules require a channel or a carrier, we call it as a facilitated diffusion. This is a channel. This one is a carrier. Channel may be a transmembrane protein, whereas a carrier protein may be a peripheral protein, which is seen on the exterior of the surface. When the molecule attaches, it undergoes a conformational change and it expels the molecule to the interior and then goes back to the original position. So, the carrier may be a peripheral protein. Next, coming to the active. Active transport, here you can see the carrier is facing to the interior of the cell where the concentration is low. That means you are going to shift the molecules from inside to the outside. That means against the gradient, we call it as uphill movement. So, active transport means we are going to shift the molecules from interior to exterior against the gradient with the help of energy, with the help of ATP. Then we call this mechanism as active transport mechanism. So this is the one diagram to show all the passive and active transport. The first thing is a simple diffusion. Even the simple diffusion can use a channel. And what is facilitated diffusion? Facilitated diffusion means using a carrier as well as a channel protein. So if the molecule is transported with the help of carrier against the gradient along with the energy utilization, we call it as an active transport. So simple diffusion and facilitated diffusion comes under passive transport, whereas the primary active transport and secondary active transport comes under the active transport, where we transport the molecule against the gradient. Next, coming to the simple diffusion. Simple diffusion means passive diffusion of the solute across the membrane, which does not require any carrier and energy. And also we move the particles down the concentration gradient.